The first inkling I had that I was going to get banned was when I was speaking to an ABC journalist on the 23rd of October. It was a Wednesday, and she was writing a piece on my Baby Killers Club post-series. All the baby killers were getting their knickers in a twist and they were getting hysterical because they felt unsafe because I'd call them baby killers, which is what they are. But, you know, it was a bit of a media firestorm for 24 hours over that post-series. The thing was, at the end of the interview, she just threw in a question: do you have any comment about the fact that people are calling for you to get banned from the SA Parliament? Now, I nearly fell off my chair because I'd literally never heard that. Getting banned is a really serious thing. A member of the public getting banned from the People's House, I figure you have to have crossed a pretty big line for that, you know, like threats of violence or actual violence or threatening to burn the house down or threatening people's kids, like, you know, pretty outrageous kind of stuff. And I knew that I wasn't even close to that line. And so when she said that to me, I just said, look, I've never heard of that. No one's put that to me. I can't possibly comment on that. And I said, are you going to put that in your story? And she said, oh, well, if you're not commenting, I won't put it in my story. So I thought, okay. So it just planted this seed of, all right, something's afoot. Obviously, they're very upset that we lost the vote by one. They know we got very, very close there to getting this to committee stage. They were very angry during the campaign because the focus on abortion at 28 weeks until birth, which was the thing that they had to sell and justify, they were really angry that we'd made so many inroads. And even the ABC on radio, the day after we lost the vote, acknowledged that momentum was on our side. It was really clear that, you know, we'd opened Pandora's box in a way that it could never be closed again, and people were waking up to late-term abortion. So, you know, the ABC piece on the Baby Killers Club came out after the hit piece in The Guardian by Tori Shepherd, and I just sort of, I guess, knew that that was the storm for that moment. But later that afternoon, I received an email from journalist Tori Shepherd, who I have a long history with. She's a very pro-abortion, a journalist is a generous word, I would call her an activist. She writes for The Guardian, which has a specifically pro-abortion editorial stance, so I don't think that they can be an objective observer or media organisation in this space. They're really a campaign organisation when they write about abortion. Tori herself has only ever written from a pro-abortion perspective, and she's written hit pieces on me, and, you know, we've gotten into spats. The first time that she sought to write a hit piece on me, she sent me a series of questions which I answered. She then published a piece claiming she never got my email, even though we had been emailing back and forth. She said, oh, it went into my junk. And, you know, at that point, I had zero following on social media and no ability to hold her to account. She literally had all the power, and she used it, in my view, to damage me. And I could see that after the vote, this is what pro-abortion elements of the media were seeking to do. Tori had already written a hit piece on the Baby Killers piece, which was just a lineup of pro-abortion MPs and activists discrediting me. And I get this email from her just a few hours after the ABC journalist accidentally let it slip that I might be banned. Now, Tori notably didn't mention the ban in her email, but it was clear that she was setting something up for a ban. And this was what she wrote. She said, "Hi Joanna, I'm writing a piece about accusations you attempted to inappropriately influence members voting on the 16th of October. A direct response rather than a social media post would be appreciated." That's because I don't give Tori the courtesy of an email back with actual answers to her questions, given that she's just writing hit pieces. She said, "I have been told, number one, that you berated Dennis Hood across the chamber as he absented himself from the vote, telling him to come back and cast his vote for the legislation, even though he had paired with Michelle Lenzik. Two, that you cornered Sarah Game in the members' lounge and convinced her to withdraw her pair by telling her the convention did not stand for conscience votes." So it was clear to me that she was writing another hit piece, and it was also clear to me that she was possibly creating the groundwork for a parliamentary ban. You know, it's very obvious to me now, being in this space, that in the parliament you've got pro-abortion MPs saying things under parliamentary privilege, and I'm going to explain that in a minute and what that means. But basically they lie about me and they get away with it because I can't sue them because they've got this thing called parliamentary privilege. They then leak that stuff to Tori Shepherd, or she just publishes verbatim the lies that they've said in Parliament using quotation marks. I can't sue her then for defamation because she's just telling the story of what's happened in Parliament. But this is not even at that point. She's writing this hit piece in advance, and she's accusing me of yelling at Dennis Hood and cornering Sarah Game. Now, when I got her email I knew I hadn't yelled at Dennis Hood. Like, that just isn't me to get up and start crazy Lydia Thorpe style yelling at someone in the parliament. I kind of would just actually be too embarrassed to do that. I've been in professional spaces a lot over my life. You know, I'm open to heckling, but I'm not a yeller. And so when she said, you berated Dennis Hood verbally in the chamber, I knew that was that was just a lie, and obviously it had been fed to her by some people who were trying to make that claim. And so, you know, I thought, well, that's absolutely ridiculous that they're saying that. But then the second thing she said was that I cornered Sarah Game in the members' lounge, and she inverted commas, you know, in quotation marks, cornered. So she was obviously getting that from someone. Now, when Ben Hood was giving his summing up speech on the night of the vote, I found out via text message that Sarah Game was intending to pair with Michelle Lenzik. I immediately knew that was not something Sarah Game would want to do, because she had been at the rallies. She was one of the most vocal supporters of the live births bill. She's extremely for the human rights of children in utero and for their mothers. That's Sarah. And so I just knew that something dodgy had gotten on. And I was sitting with one of Sarah's good friends in the gallery, and we immediately just went outside into the corridor area, and there was another MP. Now, I'm not going to say who it is, because if I say who it is, that MP will just get attacked the way that people are attacking me. And so I'm not going to say who it is. It's clearly not Ben Hood, because he was in the chamber. But to this MP, I said, Sarah Game's in there, because I could see her. I knew she was in that next adjacent room. I'm not sure if I could see her, but I just knew she was in that room. And I said, can you swipe me in, because I need to get in there and talk to her. So this MP swiped the card, and that'll be on the parliamentary records. I then was given access to that corridor with another member of the public, Sarah Game's friend, and there was Sarah, and she had Emily Burke on one side and Connie Benares on the other side, two very pro-abortion MPs telling her that she had to pair. And they basically told her, you have to pair, it's the convention. And Sarah has admitted on ABC radio that she felt lied to at that point, because she realised later that she didn't have to pair. In fact, I walked up to her and I said, Sarah, you don't have to do this. There is no convention to pair for conscience votes. That is not a parliamentary convention, and that is the actual truth. Pairing is something that the government of the day does with the opposition to allow people who are not present to be not present, and it allows the government to pass legislation even if a member of parliament is seriously ill, or they've got a children's birthday party to go to, or if they've got some other commitment. It allows government to function. But a conscience vote, there's no government position, there's no opposition position. And so the idea that you could subjugate your conscience through pairing out, it just doesn't make sense. So there's no parliamentary convention on that. I told Sarah Game that, and I also said to her, you do realise that if you don't pair, this gets to committee stage, and your voters, One Nation voters, would want this to go as far as it could, because your voters care about this issue. They care about the human rights of children in the third trimester. Sarah Game got it immediately. She understood, and she just said, I'm not going to pair. At which point, Emily Burke and Connie Benares went nuts, started screaming, and, you know, just clearly went a little bit psychotic there, attacking me. They were actually screaming so loud that my husband came rushing in out of the gallery. He couldn't get into the room we were in, but he could hear it through two doors, and there was a police officer there. And my husband said to her, are you going to do something about this? They're screaming at my wife. And she was very concerned, but at that point I just walked out, because I'd achieved what I needed to achieve through that conversation with Sarah Game, which was that she wasn't going to pair. So when Terry Shepherd sent me her email, I just wrote her a response saying, you're clearly writing a hit piece. I'm very comfortable with the conversation with Sarah, as is she. She texted me afterwards to say that people have been bothering her to say that I'd done something inappropriate, that I'd bullied her. And, you know, that, I guess, raised alarm bells for me, knowing that text message from Sarah had come through. Tori's email, it was starting to piece together with the ABC ban, the ABC woman saying that it was going to get banned. It was all starting to piece together to line up to the fact that I was getting stitched up, that people from the other side were clearly using their power and privilege to get some kind of Machiavellian manoeuvre on the floor of the parliament to get me banned. Now, I didn't know how it was going to happen, how it would work, but I could see that it was in the works. But then the next thing that happened was the following Wednesday, Jing Lee, the other MP that I spoke to, made a statement on the floor of the parliament. So this is a week after Tori was going to write her hit piece. It didn't materialise, I think because they just knew it all depended on Sarah Game saying that I'd acted inappropriately to her, and she clearly wasn't going to say that. And I knew that she wasn't going to say that. And Tori knew that I knew that she wasn't going to say that, because I wrote her that in an email. So they had to look around for somebody else. The following Wednesday, it became clear that their new person was Jing Lee. I don't know what kind of pressure they put on Jing to make that statement. It was an absolutely crazy statement for her to make. First of all, she doesn't even name me, so it's just this weird statement where she talks about pressure from an external visitor. But everybody knows it's me because I'm the external visitor she spoke to. Like, it was clearly me, and I still don't to this day get, why didn't she name me? Maybe she didn't want to throw me under the bus completely. I don't know. She's still following me on social media to this day as well. So, it's just was such a strange speech for her to make. And the first I heard about it was when David Bevan texted me and he said, do you have any response to what Jing Lee said in the parliament about you? I honestly hadn't seen the statement. I was about to go pick up the kids. I said, can you send it to me? And then other journalists started texting in, asking me for comment. I honestly was just really confused because the conversation I'd had with Jing Lee was cordial. What happened on that night of the vote was I discovered at the very start of the debate on the bill that Jing Lee was still pairing with Michelle Lenzik. I'd been told by the Liberal Party that they weren't going to pair on this vote because it was a conscience vote and it was so important. And yet here I was, I just found out just before the dinner break that Jing Lee was pairing with Michelle Lenzik. I immediately called her, left a voicemail, but as I was leaving, I saw her in the I saw her in the foyer area. She was talking to some people and she hadn't gone through this particular door where I wouldn't have been able to follow her. And so I just walked straight up to her and I said, Jing, I'm Joanna Howe, can I please have a chat with you about your decision to pair? It's really urgent. And she was very gracious and said, of course, and she ushered me in. And we had a good chat for about 15 minutes. I explained to her, if you pair, this won't proceed to committee stage. I will hold you to account on social media and with my database. I've got 120,000 people that follow me. That's been spoken of as if it was some sort of really threatening, intimidating behaviour. It just wasn't. It was literally what any lobbyist or advocate would say to a member of parliament about how they're going to vote. This is how democracy works. So I said that to Jing. She agreed not to pair. She didn't realise it was so close. And so I went through all of the people that were voting and she just said, okay, I'm not going to pair. You persuaded me. We took a selfie together and she even texted me afterwards saying, thank you for seizing the moment in the dinner break. She even said, of her own volition, that she wouldn't tell the Liberal whip, who I think is Laura Henderson. She said, I won't tell them that I'm not going to pair until the very last moment so that Labor doesn't have a chance to scramble on this and a new pair be organised. And that's in the text message exchange as well. And then when Russell Wortley starts doing this very long-winded speech in the Parliament because he knows he's got to buy time so they can find a pair, Jing texted me and said, it's terrible, they're buying time. So the speech she gave about being blindsided by fear, about this very intimidating external visitor, it didn't match up at all with our interaction. In fact, I was completely blindsided, but I felt sorry for her when I heard the speech afterwards, after Bevan showed it to me, because I felt like, gosh, she just obviously was under a lot of pressure to give that speech. I know they pressured Sarah Gain for 2 weeks. They've now found a new target. I don't know what they threatened her with, but she gave the speech. It's just the dirtiness of politics. Like, it's just really disgusting. But I went on David Bevan the next day, on the Thursday morning. Are we up to Thursday? I sort of get the days mixed up. But the day after Jing gives her speech, I think that was a Tuesday. Anyway, the Wednesday morning, I then go on David Bevan and I just explain the text message exchange, the selfie, how it all went down. And I thought at that point, because Kat Birmingham from The Advertiser wrote a story and published the selfie in the text message exchange, I thought at that point, surely this ban business is going to be over. They were clearly setting Jing Lee up to as the reason for the ban. I thought, surely it's going to be over now. So something you guys need to know is when someone does something like that, you immediately just feel really exposed. I know I come across as a strong person, but the reality is no matter who you are, whether you're the strongest person in the world, if someone does something like that, where they read this statement about how you are a bully and you're intimidating, and then they say all of these things about you, you just can't help but feel so incredibly exposed. And that's how I felt. I felt like I was naked and everyone could just see through me. And there's this book, Alarmist Gatekeeping, that I talk about a lot. Dr. Debbie Garrett wrote it. She traces how anybody who's ever spoken up about abortion in Australia from a critical perspective has been bullied, cancelled, intimidated, harassed and shut down. And no one really has survived that. I read that book 2.5 years ago before I started doing this work, and I knew it was going to happen to me. But I guess when Terry Stevens made his statement, which was so untrue about me, but I knew it was just going to be repeated everywhere across the entire media, and he was basically calling me a bully, I knew that oh gosh, maybe this is it. Maybe this stops me from ever being able to be effective in the pro-life space again, because they've framed me as a bully, they've stitched me up, and they've got all the power, and they can just do this. And so I was devastated. The kids got in the car, and I was crying, because you just, I don't know, like whether I should say that. I don't want the other side to think that they get to me, but it is just the truth. It gets to you, and it's hard. But I also knew that you just have to fight back. And so I got home, put on my makeup, marched to Parliament to do a press conference, did live TV with Peter Credlin, got into an argument with a crazy pro-abortion announcer on ABC radio, on live radio. It was the most ridiculous interview. I'll share that with you at some point in a later video, but because she needs to be held to account. But, you know, I think I knew that I can't allow them to silence me. And so what I'm going to do now for the last part of this video is just to go through the statement that Terry Stevens gave to ban me, and to show you how it is just all a pack of lies. It is literally a pack of lies. There is nothing in it that is true. And what's even more egregious than just all the blatant lying is the fact that they get away with it because there's no due process. You know, no one wrote to me and said, these formal allegations have been made, would you like to respond? No one gave me that chance. No one gave me that procedural fairness. And there's not even substantive fairness, because they lied about me in Parliament, and then journalists have quoted verbatim Terry Stevens' lies. It's now this false narrative that's been perpetuated in pro-abortion media like the ABC and The Guardian, which then establishes me as a bully. So my only hope is to use social media and sympathetic elements of the media, or at least open-minded elements of the media, to get my message out. And so I really am relying on you guys to help me do this, to sign that petition that's going to flick up on the screen, to make sure that everybody signs it, because it's just through people power that we're going to be able to overturn this. So let's have a look at what Terry Stevens said. Now, before we watch it, I just want to tell you about parliamentary privilege. That was established by Thomas More. So he was the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK. That's the equivalent of Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer. At the time, Henry VIII was the king. Thomas More wanted parliamentarians to be able to criticise the king, who was acting in an extremely authoritarian way. And parliamentary privilege was the way that parliamentarians could criticise the king without having, without any kind of punitive action, lawsuits or criminal penalties. You know, so that's what it's meant to be there. It's meant to protect politicians to be able to fearlessly say the truth about what's going on, to call out things that are really egregious and disgusting that are going on. What has happened here, though, is parliamentary privilege has been abused by a cowardly cabal of pro-abortion MPs who have fed lies to Terry Stevens, who then repeats them as part of his statement to assassinate my character and good name. And another way this becomes so sinister is that they actually collude with the media, and they use this parliamentary privilege to say lies about me in the Parliament, and they leak it in advance to pro-abortion media like Tori Shepherd, who can then write her hit pieces in advance. But then after it's been said in the Parliament, the media gets something called a limited privilege, where they can quote verbatim the things that have been said in Parliament, and then it is used to further assassinate me and destroy my character. It's actually just really corrupt. It's really corrupt that they could use their power in this way. And I'm determined to keep calling it out. I don't care if only 5 people watch this video. I don't actually care about that. I just want to get this on the record for my own
Tuesday this week, the Honourable Jinglee gave a personal explanation to the Council relating to the events of that night and her personal experiences, particularly with, in her words, a very persistent visitor. The Honourable Jinglee expressed that she felt very vulnerable on the night and felt that she was put in a compromising situation. The Honourable Lee also expressed that the situation on that Wednesday was escalated in having an external person attempting to inappropriately influence the voting of members.
That just doesn't match up with the discussion that Jinglee and I had in terms of her feeling very vulnerable. We were in a public place, sitting on a couch, it was well lit. We were having a discussion back and forth. I would have thought politicians always have those kinds of discussions with advocates and members of the public about how they're going to vote. And I just don't see how that matches up to the discussion we had. He then makes this allegation that there was some kind of inappropriate influence over the vote. Again, that doesn't match up with what I said to her, which is I'll hold you to account for how you voted, which is what people do all the time. Climate change groups or business groups or Christian groups, they always publish how people vote on particular issues. And, you think about a mining company or the mining industry. If the government's going to introduce a mining tax, they're going to say, we're going to run ads with our billions of dollars unless you don't introduce a mining tax. This is just how politics works. People make threats and then they follow through with them because that's democracy. It's the only power that people have. That Terry Stevens started his speech with Jing Li, even though over the last 24 hours, her story had come crumbling down through the selfie that we took together and the text message exchange where she literally says, thank you for seizing the moment to talk to me in the dinner break. There's no attempt at balance here or moderation, no, Professor Howe refutes this or has said this in response. None of that. It's just clearly a one-sided hit.
I've received a number of complaints and accounts, both in writing and verbal, from multiple members of the council in respect of the behaviour of visitors on that night.
So he references anonymous complaints. Now, I get anonymous complaints in certain sectors. So the Fair Work Ombudsman, for example, has an anonymous hotline where workers who are being exploited can write in and tell about their situation of exploitation. You get that because there's a total power imbalance there between an employer and potentially a migrant worker who's on a visa, maybe doesn't have a right to work, they're being exploited, they need this job. You can understand why anonymity is important. Here, Stevens is referencing anonymous complaints by MPs who are paid more than $215,000 a year about me. He says there's multiple complaints, and yet I have never been notified of these complaints. I've never been told who they are. In fact, none of us have. The next morning on radio, after Terry Stevens makes this statement, David Bevan is receiving texts from pro-abortion Labor MPs like Reggie Martin, Emily Burke, these people saying, oh, we didn't make these complaints. Everybody's sort of disappearing away from it. And yet he uses multiple anonymous complaints by MPs about my behaviour to character assassinate me.
Those complaints relate to the behaviour of visitors in areas adjacent to the chamber, including areas where visitors should not have access unless accompanied by a member or their staff.
In addition to the bullying, the other narrative that they're trying to frame is that I'm roaming the corridors, harassing MPs, making them feel unsafe in their place of work. This ABC journalist, I forget her name, she was on Drive that afternoon and she said, how could you be going into, their place of work late at night and making them feel unsafe? Now, what a ridiculous question, because it's not my fault that they choose to do this work in the evening. I mean, if they're too lazy to get out of bed and start work at 9 o'clock like the rest of us and finish at 6 and have a reasonable work day, that's their business. But the fact is, they didn't start this vote till about, what was it, like 6 o'clock, just before the dinner break, and then they kept going into the evening. You would expect political lobbying to occur during that time then. So it's not like I'm going into their place of work very creepily and sinisterly, is that a word, in the middle of the night to try and intimidate them. It's just so insane that that's the narrative that they're trying to paint about me. But, this whole roaming the corridors, bullying people, I was only ever in one corridor, which I think was a members' sitting area that was adjacent to the chamber, and that was where I had the conversation with Sarah Game that I told you about earlier. An MP swiped me into there, and when I was in that corridor, I was with Sarah Game the entire time, another MP. So, no one ever asked me to leave. No one ever told me I was breaking a rule. I didn't even know I was breaking a rule. They really need to increase their security if they're so paranoid about where people are walking. Like, nobody said you can't be in this space and you need to get out. So for them to now, ipso facto, retrospectively create this narrative of this shadowy, bullying, intimidating figure, that's me, roaming the corridors, harassing people, threatening their lives and their children, it's actually just really insane.
Of the highest concern is the suggestion that the visitor was attempting to improperly influence the free performance by members of their duties as a member.
So there's more of that inappropriately influencing the vote BS. I mean, who are these people? They're either corrupt dictators who think nobody should ever be able to challenge them about how they're going to vote and tackle them head on and say, look, if you vote this way, I'm going to hold you to account. Or they're just really stupid and they don't get how democracy works. Like, I've tried to think about a third option, but I can't think it. Like, they're so authoritarian that they think nobody should be able to challenge them on how they're going to vote and hold them to account.
During the division, it was claimed that Dr Howe was observed yelling at the Honourable Dennis Hood to discourage him from vacating the chamber in order to provide a pair for the vote.
So this is absolute BS. I never yelled at Dennis Hood. As I said before, heckling is something I might do. But just to be clear, like for me, heckling is more like a shame, you know, like that. It's not a yelling at someone Lydia Thorpe style. That's just not in my personality to get up in that kind of setting and yell. You know, like I've yelled at my kids before, but in a professional setting, it's not like I'm just going to stand up and just start yelling. And I didn't yell at Dennis Hood. And in fact, in the Advertiser the next day, Dennis Hood has said, Joanna Howe never intimidated me or threatened me, didn't yell at me. What happened at that moment of the vote? So we had been told Jing Lee was going to pair because they put pressure on her. Then Sarah Game was going to pair because they put pressure on her. And then when they weren't going to pair, they started going nuts. Like, honestly, guys, on the floor and outside, there were people like Katrine Hildyard, Emily Burke, Connie Benares, Tammy Franks. They were all going crazy trying to find this pair. And one of the people that they had taken into, you know, what a metaphorical dark room is Tung No, the Labor MP. He's very pro-life, clearly a supporter of the live births bill, but there was a lot of intimidation and standover tactics there. And, you know, I even put this tweet on social media at the time saying they are circling around this very good man to try and get him to go against his conscience. I was talking about Tung. When the vote happened, Tung stayed seated on the side supporting the bill. And so I started counting the numbers and I was like, oh my gosh, we're going to get this to committee stage. Tung is seated. But then I realised there's only 9 there, so somebody must have paired. And then I saw Dennis standing there. It was honestly like a scene from the movies that, you know, it was so tense. And I realised he'd paired out. And I said to my husband who was sitting next to me, I said, oh my gosh, it's Dennis. And that was literally my reaction. And I did say that audibly, but it wasn't yelling. I said, oh my gosh, it's Dennis. And at that point, I said Dennis like this, but I did not yell. If I said Dennis at all, it was at a very low level. But my husband, who has a much louder voice than me, he just said, come on, mate. And I think I elbowed him because I didn't want us to get kicked out. At which point, Ian Hunter, who's the Labor government whip, who's got into a lot of trouble before for aggressive behaviour, he yells very aggressively at me, I think, because he was looking at me, stop it. So what's very clear is that I didn't yell at Dennis Hood, but I did do this. Now, some really stupid people have tried to say that this is inappropriately influencing the vote. But I think what people are getting confused with here is democracy versus a criminal trial. So if you've got a criminal trial, and you know, I'm a professor of law, so I teach this stuff at law school. If you've got a criminal trial, it is an offence to tamper with the jury, to improperly influence the jury, because we've picked 12 ordinary people to serve on a jury. They have to then decide whether the crime is proved, the alleged crime is proved beyond reasonable doubt. It's a very serious matter in a jury trial and you can't tamper with them. If I was gesturing like this at a jury member or yelling things out during a jury trial, that would be inappropriately influencing the jury, and it's not an appropriate thing to do under criminal law. But in a democracy, you've got all sorts of people sitting in the public gallery. You've got people wearing T-shirts with political statements and slogans. You've got people saying things, and you know, people shout and speak from the public gallery all the time. It gets raucous in Parliament. I think we all know that. We've all seen that footage. And I certainly didn't get to a level of yelling. And the reason we know this is because I never got kicked out. So it's so ridiculous now for people to be retrospectively inventing this narrative when Ian Hunter yelled at me and the speaker tells the gallery to be quiet, but he doesn't kick me out because he had no grounds to kick me out. And so there was nothing inappropriate about me gesturing this to Dennis because it wasn't a criminal trial. This is a democratic process and I have freedom of expression and speech and bodily autonomy, and the idea that they just want us all to sit like robots, well, that's how I imagine people sit in a public gallery, you know, when Chairman Mao makes a pronouncement. It's not what you would imagine in a democracy, that the gallery just sits there like robots. And you certainly shouldn't get banned from Parliament because you gestured at someone.
Members have claimed to witness insults and threatening and intimidating tactics employed by Dr Howe towards some members.
I honestly don't even know what this is referring to. I spoke to 2 MPs that night about how they're going to vote. One was Jing Lee, the other was Sarah Game. With Jing Lee, I've got a text message exchange and a selfie. With Sarah, she's come out on my YouTube now to say, there was nothing wrong with our conversation. And she's been saying that publicly for a couple of weeks. So I don't know what insults they're referring to. What I have heard off the record is that this is a cowardly bunch of pro-abortion MPs who are so angry that we got one vote short, who are so angry at how effective the campaign was for the live births bill, who are on a revenge mission. And the baby killers post in their mind is really doing strange things, and it's just upsetting, I think, for them, deeply confronting for the truth to be in their face. And when they say that I was like walking around insulting people, I mean, I'll just let you guys make up your own mind about that. And Connie Benares was on ABC Radio just the other day saying, oh, well, she wants due process. Well, did the members of the Baby Killers Club get due process? I mean, what a ridiculous thing for her to say. That's me exercising my free speech to call them out as baby killers because they want to inject babies with potassium chloride after 28 weeks and up until birth. I think it's a pretty apt description of who they are. And then Connie's comparing that to pro-abortion MPs colluding with Terry Stevens in the Parliament to use their power and privilege to get me banned. Of course, with a banning, which he hasn't even given an expiration date on it, so it could literally be for life. You know, it seems like it is. Of course, with that, it's a significant legal decision, and therefore you should have procedural fairness. I mean, due process should be entitled for that. Me calling her a baby killer and putting her in my club, that's just me exercising my freedom of speech. And if she disagrees with it, in a democracy, she can come out and say, I'm not a baby killer, and this is why. And by the way, when she talks about process, she has access to a process. If Connie Benares or any of the other members of the Baby Killers Club want to go through a process, they can sue me for defamation and show how the Baby Killers Club is a lie. But the thing is, they can't do that because I would win in court, because it's not defamatory to call them the Baby Killers Club, because I'm just calling them out for what they actually voted for in the Parliament or what they've spoken about publicly. But I don't have access to that process. They use parliamentary privilege to seriously lie about me in an egregious way. They colluded with the media to get those lies out, and I don't have any recourse to justice. There's literally nothing I can do other than filming this video to expose the lies and to get my side of the story out. To ban a member of the public from the People's House is a portent of things to come. It shows how authoritarian they are and how petrified they are of anyone questioning abortion up to birth in this country. Now, you might not care about abortion, you might not be pro-life, that's completely fine, but I think we should all be concerned when people who have power use it against people like us, ordinary people, in this way. So I am asking you to sign my petition, to spread the word, to share this video, because the only way that we have a democracy is if people like you and me have a voice, and if we're not silenced by those with privilege and power in the Parliament because they disagree with us.